They say revenge is a dish best served cold. My cousin Chloe learned that lesson the hard way. By the time I was finished, her world wasn't just cold. It was shattered into a million icy fragments, all laid bare for everyone she'd ever known to see. But this story, my story of brutal payback, began in a place that was already chilling me to the bone. A stark, sterile police interrogation room. The cold metal of the table pressed against my forearms. Across from me, Detective Miller, his face a roadmap of exhaustion and cynicism, slid a photograph. My breath hitched. It was Grandma Eleanor's sapphire necklace, the Star of Eleanor. Its deep blue, usually so vibrant, looked dull and lifeless under the harsh fluorescent lights. He asked, his voice flat, if I recognized this. My heart hammered against my ribs. Of course I told him it was my grandmother's. It was mine now. He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of ice. It was mine, he corrected. They had reason to believe I stole this necklace. Stole it and then reported it missing. Stole it? The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My own grandmother's necklace? The centerpiece of the inheritance she'd lovingly left me? My mind, already reeling from the shock of its disappearance, now spun with a new, sickening dread. One name, one face flashed behind my eyes, accompanied by a wave of nausea. Chloe. My cousin Chloe. How could this be happening? Just a few short months ago my life felt normal. Predictable even. As a young woman, I was focused on building my career in graphic design, juggling deadlines, client meetings, and the endless quest for the perfect shade of Pantone blue. My apartment was my sanctuary, a small but light-filled space overflowing with plants and the comforting scent of old books and brewing coffee. The true anchor in my life, the unwavering beacon, had always been my grandmother, Eleanor. She wasn't just family, she was my confidant, my mentor, the one person who understood my artistic soul. Her home, a rambling Victorian with a sprawling garden that smelled of roses and damp earth, was my second home, a place of laughter and whispered secrets. Her passing, after a brief but fierce battle with illness, had left an Eleanor-shaped hole in my universe. The silence in her house was a physical presence, heavy and unbearable. The will reading was a somber affair, the air thick with unspoken grief and anticipation. Most of the family gathered in the familiar drawing room, its velvet curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. My cousin Chloe was there, of course. She was a few years older, always impeccably dressed, her ambition a sharp, glittering thing hidden just beneath a veneer of forced sweetness. We'd grown up in each other's orbits, but her smiles rarely reached her eyes when she looked at me. There was always a faint, almost imperceptible air of resentment. When the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and began to read Grandma's final wishes, a hush fell. The bulk of the estate, including the beloved family home and the legendary Star of Eleanor sapphire necklace, was left to me. My breath caught in my throat. The necklace, it wasn't just jewelry. It was a legacy, a stunning constellation of deep blue sapphire and blazing diamonds, passed down through generations, its monetary value immense, but its sentimental worth immeasurable. A wave of emotion washed over me, profound gratitude, a crushing sense of responsibility, and a fresh, sharp pang of missing Grandma. Chloe received a significant cash inheritance, enough to ensure her comfort. But I saw it, just for a flicker, before her carefully constructed mask of polite sorrow snapped back into place. A tightening around her eyes, her perfectly painted lips thinning almost invisibly as Mr. Henderson described the necklace bequeathed to me. It was a look I hadn't understood then, but in hindsight, it was the first tremor of the earthquake that would eventually rip my life apart. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal documents, sympathy calls, and the quiet, persistent ache of grief. Chloe, however, seemed to bounce back with unnerving speed. She cornered me after the small family gathering post-funeral, her voice a confection of sugary sympathy. "Oh, Sarah, darling," she'd said, her hand resting briefly, possessively on my arm. "You will have to be so terribly careful with all that. Such a huge responsibility. Especially for someone, well, for you." Her smile was bright, but her eyes were like polished stones. The subtle barb in for you pricked at my skin. What did she mean by that? Then the small, unsettling occurrences began. I kept important probate documents in a specific labeled folder on my mahogany desk. One morning, the folder was inexplicably on the bookshelf across the room, tucked behind a stack of art books. I was certain I hadn't moved it. My mind felt foggy with grief. Perhaps I was just being forgetful. A few days later, a cherished framed photograph of me and Grandma Eleanor, her arm around my shoulder, her eyes crinkling with laughter, which always sat on my bedside table, was turned to face the wall. My heart gave a little jolt. It was so deliberate. I lived alone. There was no one else. Chloe called, her voice laced with that familiar, cloying concern. Aunt Carol was just saying she'd begun how you misplaced her cashmere wrap that time at Christmas years ago. Remember that? She's just a bit worried, with you having the necklace and all. You know how she fusses. I did remember. I'd found the wrap later, fallen behind a sofa cushion. It had been an accident, a minor thing. But Chloe's resurrection of the memory, framed as Aunt Carol's concern, felt calculated. It felt like she was meticulously planting seeds of doubt about my competence, my reliability. A cold sliver of unease, sharp as a shard of glass, began to embed itself in my mind. Was I being paranoid? Or was Chloe's sweetness a meticulously crafted performance, hiding something far more sinister? I tried to push the thoughts away, blaming stress and sorrow. But the feeling lingered, a faint, unpleasant odor I couldn't quite identify but knew was there. The unease only intensified as weeks turned into a month. The Star of Eleanor, its central sapphire like a captive piece of the midnight sky, lay nestled in a heavy-duty safe in my apartment study. Probate was a slow, grinding process, but my lawyer had advised that keeping it with me for now was the most secure option given the complexities of accessing estate assets in bank vaults. Chloe's visits, once occasional, became noticeably more frequent. She'd appear at my door unannounced, a gourmet coffee in hand, or a small box of expensive pastries, her smile wide, her questions about my well-being endless and solicitous. Just wanted to see my favorite cousin, she'd chirp, her voice bright. But her eyes, I started to notice, had a way of flicking around my apartment, a quick, almost imperceptible inventory, always pausing for a fraction of a second longer on the closed door of my study. "Are you managing okay financially, sweetie?" she asked one afternoon, her head tilted in an attitude of perfect sisterly concern. "I know starting out in design can be tough. And probate, well, it can drag on for ages. If you ever need anything." Her words were superficially kind, but her tone felt probing, almost predatory. "I am fine, Chloe, thank you," I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. One evening, as I was sketching late into the night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I usually ignored them, but an odd compulsion made me answer. Silence. Then a faint, muffled click like someone hastily replacing a receiver. A shiver traced its way down my spine. Probably just a wrong number, I told myself, but it added another layer to the growing mountain of unsettling little events. A few days later, I met Aunt Carol for coffee. "Chloe mentioned you were thinking of getting the necklace appraised again for insurance," she said, stirring her latte. "She seemed to think you were worried about its security." I frowned, confused. I haven't discussed that with her at all. In fact, the necklace was already fully insured under a rider on Grandma's policy, which was still active. Oh, Aunt Carol looked flustered. Well, she just seemed so concerned. "Said you were a bit overwhelmed by it all, dear." The whispers. Chloe was orchestrating them, a puppet master pulling invisible strings. She was painting a picture of me as incapable, perhaps even unstable. The knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened until it ached. What game was she playing? A profound sense of isolation began to creep over me, as if a delicate sticky web was being spun around me, strand by silken strand. I started to obsessively double-check the locks on my doors and windows, the prickle of suspicion a constant companion at the back of my neck. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and I had a sickening feeling that Chloe was the spider at the center of that web. The storm I'd sensed brewing finally broke, not with a gentle rain, but with the shattering force of a hurricane. I woke up one Tuesday morning, the city's familiar rumble a distant hum outside my window. I made coffee, my thoughts already on a looming design deadline. As I walked past my study, a sliver of unease cut through my morning routine. The door was slightly ajar. My heart lurched into my throat. I always kept it closed. Pushing it open, my eyes flew straight to the corner where the safe stood. Or rather, where it should have been securely closed. The safe itself was still there. But its heavy steel door, it was open. Swung wide. And the velvet-lined interior was starkly, horrifyingly empty. A strangled gasp tore from my lungs. The Star of Eleanor. Gone. My hands trembled so violently I could barely grip my phone. My first panicked instinct, a decision I'd regret for a long time, was to call Chloe. She lived just a few blocks away. She'd know what to do, I thought foolishly. Her voice on the other end was sleepy, but it sharpened instantly, morphing into theatrical panic when I choked out the horrifying news. "Oh my God, Sarah. Stay right there. Don't touch anything. I'm coming over." She arrived in what felt like seconds, her face a mask of pale distress. Or so I initially perceived. She rushed into the study, her eyes wide with an exaggerated horror that even in my shock felt slightly off-key. "They took it? The necklace?" Then she did something that sent a sliver of ice through my already freezing veins. Her eyes scanned the room, not with the frantic, unfocused searching of someone looking for clues, but with a strange, almost predatory focus. Her gaze landed on the area beneath my plush velvet sofa. "What is that?" she murmured, bending down with a small, dramatic flourish. She emerged holding a small, crinkled piece of paper. A pawn ticket. Dated for the previous afternoon. For a cheap, gold-plated fashion ring. My blood turned to ice water. I had never seen that ticket before in my life. Chloe's voice was a horrified whisper, her eyes wide with an accusation that bloomed far too quickly, far too readily. You wouldn't." Her gaze was heavy with pity and condemnation. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Debts perhaps?" "What? No. Chloe, that is not mine. I have never seen it before." My voice was rising, shrill with panic. This was a nightmare, a surreal, terrifying play, and I was its unwilling star. "We have to call the police," she said, her voice suddenly firm, authoritative. But her eyes, just for a moment, held a flicker of something I couldn't decipher then. Something cold. Triumph, perhaps? The police arrived, their sirens a mournful wail that seemed to announce my downfall to the entire neighborhood. The scene in my apartment was one of controlled chaos. Chloe, with tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, recounted how she'd found the pawn ticket. She delicately yet persistently wove a narrative of her concerns about my financial stability, my supposed flightiness, my inability to cope with the pressure of the inheritance. The detectives, grim-faced and efficient, noted the conspicuous lack of forced entry to the apartment. My spare key. The spare key I'd given Chloe months ago in a moment of sisterly trust, just in case of emergencies. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. He still had it. I'd completely forgotten to ask for it back after Grandma's funeral. A rookie mistake, a catastrophically naive oversight. The questions from the detectives became sharper, more pointed. My frantic denials sounded weak, desperate, even to my own ears. The expertly opened safe, the conveniently discovered pawn ticket, Chloe's insidious campaign of whispers. It all coalesced into a damning, horrifically plausible picture. Later that same day, I found myself in that cold, soulless interrogation room, Detective Miller's accusation echoing in the sterile air. "We have reason to believe you stole this necklace, Ms. Walker." I was eventually released, pending further investigation. A legal limbo that felt like a life sentence. The damage was done. My world had been systematically dismantled. My family was in turmoil. Some regarded me with thinly veiled pity, others with outright cutting suspicion. The inheritance, my grandmother's precious legacy of love, was now irrevocably tainted, a source of profound shame and potential ruin. Chloe, who offered tearful public declarations of support while her eyes held that chilling, knowing glint. I knew then, with a certainty that settled like a block of ice in my soul, she had orchestrated this entire monstrous charade. She had framed me. But why? And how, dear God, how could I ever prove it? The despair was a physical weight, a crushing pressure threatening to extinguish the last spark of hope within me. The days that followed were a Dantean descent into a personal hell of shame, fear, and a burning, impotent anger. I was a pariah in my own life. Whispers trailed me like shadows. Some family members, people I'd known my entire life, outright avoided my calls, their silence a deafening condemnation. My lawyer, a kind but pragmatic man, wore a grim expression during our meetings, warning me that the circumstantial evidence, while not conclusive, was dangerously strong against me. Chloe, meanwhile, ascended to the role of the concerned, capable cousin with sickening ease. She even had the audacity to offer to help manage the estate during this terribly difficult time for poor Sarah. A transparent ploy to gain control that made my blood boil. But beneath the layers of despair and humiliation, a tiny, resilient spark of defiance began to glow. I had not done this. Grandma Eleanor had not raised a thief, nor had she raised a quitter. If the police, blinded by Chloe's cunning, weren't going to unearth the truth, then I would. I would claw it out of the darkness myself. I replayed every conversation, every interaction with Chloe, every odd incident, sifting through the memories like an archaeologist searching for a crucial artifact. And then a faint glimmer. Months ago, before Grandma's health had taken its final, irreversible downturn, Chloe had shown an unusual, almost obsessive interest in Grandma's old laptop. She'd asked, with feigned casualness, if Grandma ever used it for online shopping or forums. At the time, it had seemed like a harmless, trivial question. Now, in the harsh light of my current reality, it felt profoundly significant. Chloe wasn't a tech guru by any stretch, but she did have her niche passions. She collected antique porcelain dolls and was an active participant in several obscure online communities dedicated to them. What if, I thought, my heart beginning to thump a little faster, what if she utilized similar, more discreet forums for other transactions? It was a desperate, improbable long shot, a Hail Mary pass in the final seconds of a losing game. But it was something. I still possessed my graphic design skills, my ability to create an illusion. I concocted a new, completely anonymous email address. Then I built a persona, Aurelia, a wealthy, reclusive European collector with a penchant for unique, historically significant jewelry. I joined a high-end, incredibly discreet online forum for collectors of rare gems and antiques, the kind of clandestine marketplace where serious money changed hands, often with minimal paperwork and maximum anonymity. Then I cast my line into the digital void. I didn't mention the Star of Eleanor by name. That would be far too obvious, too risky. Instead, I crafted a vague, tantalizing inquiry. Seeking exceptional antique sapphire and diamond necklace, preferably of historical significance. Substantial budget for the right piece. Utmost discretion assured and expected. Days crawled by, each one stretching into an eternity of anxious waiting. I checked the forum obsessively, my hope dwindling with each passing hour, the silence a crushing weight. And then a notification. A private message. The sender's username was Bluebird_77. The message itself was cautious, almost coy. I may know of a piece that fits your discerning criteria. Recently acquired. Unique provenance. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. The phrasing, that slight, almost theatrical formality mixed with a hint of something slippery, underhanded. It was so Chloe. It echoed her careful, manipulative way of speaking when she was trying to subtly control a situation. I replied as Aurelia, expressing keen, almost breathless interest, asking for more details, perhaps a photograph if possible. Another agonizing day passed. Then a new message from Bluebird_77. It is a piece of extraordinary beauty. The sapphire is like the heart of the evening sky. My breath caught. The phrase. That was almost verbatim how Grandma Eleanor, a romantic at heart, used to describe the Star of Eleanor. Attached to the message were several photographs. They were cleverly but not perfectly disguised. The necklace was laid on a plain, dark velvet cloth, the lighting artfully dim, some angles deliberately obscured to prevent easy identification. But there was no mistaking it. The unique, almost starburst cut of the central sapphire, the specific, intricate arrangement of the surrounding diamonds. It was the Star of Eleanor. Chloe. It had to be her. My mind reeled. She hadn't pawned it for a quick, relatively small sum as the planted ticket had been designed to suggest. That was merely a brilliant, cruel piece of misdirection. She was attempting to sell it on the clandestine collector's market for its true, staggering value. She needed untraceable cash and a vast amount of it. This was far bigger, far more audacious and premeditated than I could ever have conceived. A surge of adrenaline, hot and fierce, coursed through me, banishing the last vestiges of despair. I had her. Or at least I had the first crucial thread of the web that would ultimately ensnare her. I meticulously screenshotted everything, my mind already racing, a plan, a risky, terrifying but potentially devastating plan, beginning to crystallize. The hunted was about to become the hunter. My plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but I was fueled by a righteous fury and the dawning realization that I had nothing left to lose. I needed more than just anonymous screenshots. I needed an irrefutable ironclad link between Bluebird_77 and Chloe. I continued my careful correspondence as Aurelia, expressing ever-increasing interest and discussing a potential price that was astronomically high, a sum so tempting I knew Chloe, in her greed, wouldn't be able to resist. As we negotiated, I subtly steered the conversation. I, as Aurelia, mentioned needing to verify the necklace's authenticity through a trusted, highly discreet gemologist in her city before any funds would be transferred. This was the carefully laid bait. After some well-acted hesitation about security, Bluebird_77 agreed. She suggested a meeting place for Aurelia's courier to view the item, a private, by-appointment-only viewing room at a high-end old-money jewelry store renowned for its discretion. A place Chloe likely believed was utterly secure and untraceable. This is where my friend Liam, a genuine wizard with computers and coding, became my unlikely accomplice. Liam was a quiet genius I'd helped with branding for his fledgling tech startup. He owed me a favor, and when I laid out the bare bones of my situation, omitting the more perilous-sounding details, he was visibly horrified on my behalf and, to my relief, fiercely eager to help. He helped me set up a secure, encrypted communication channel for my Aurelia persona and, more importantly, taught me how to use a voice modulator for a crucial phone call. Posing as Aurelia's stern, no-nonsense German assistant, Mr. Hoffman, I called the burner phone number Bluebird_77, eventually, reluctantly, provided for urgent communication only. The voice on the other end, despite a slight, tinny attempt at disguise, was undeniably, chillingly Chloe's. We confirmed the viewing appointment. Liam, meanwhile, worked his digital magic. Using the IP address from the forum messages, which, though masked by a VPN, he painstakingly traced back to a specific internet cafe Chloe was known to frequent, and cross-referencing it with cell tower data he carefully, and somewhat creatively from a legal standpoint, obtained for the times of our communications, he began to build a compelling, damning digital footprint. The final, most critical piece of the puzzle was the gemologist's courier. I couldn't risk involving an actual gemologist. The stakes were too high. So I used the last of my rapidly dwindling savings to hire a private investigator, a grizzled, retired police detective named Frank, highly recommended by my lawyer as someone thorough, discreet, and unafraid of murky waters. I explained the situation, showed him my growing file of evidence. He was initially skeptical, his eyes narrowed, then intrigued, then, as the full picture emerged, grimly determined. Frank would pose as the courier. His mission: to visually confirm it was indeed the Star of Eleanor, to get Chloe on hidden camera with the necklace in her possession, and if possible to get her to talk even obliquely about its acquisition. The day of the viewing arrived. I was a taut bundle of nerves, pacing the confines of my tiny apartment like a caged animal. Frank was wired for sound and video. Liam was on standby, ready to coordinate with Frank and monitor everything from his own secure location. The hours stretched, each minute an eternity. Then finally Frank called. "We have it," he said, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of grim satisfaction. She was nervous, but her greed outweighed her caution. showed me the necklace, talked about how it came into her possession through a, quote, private family matter, unquote. It is all recorded. Clear as day. Relief washed over me so potent it buckled my knees. I sank onto the sofa, tears blurring my vision. I had her. Chloe, so smug, so utterly convinced of her own superior cleverness, had waltzed right into my meticulously constructed trap. The digital evidence, the audio recordings, the video footage of her with the stolen necklace, Frank's eyewitness account. It was an airtight, irrefutable case. Now for the final act. It wouldn't be enough to simply hand this evidence to the police. Chloe had attempted to systematically destroy my life, my reputation, my most cherished connection to my grandmother's memory. She deserved more than a quiet arrest, a discreet legal process. She deserved to be exposed publicly and unequivocally, in front of the very people whose respect she craved and whose opinions she had so cruelly manipulated against me. My revenge wouldn't be swift and silent. It would be a slow, meticulous, public unraveling. It would, as the title of this story suggests, be brutal. I decided the stage for Chloe's spectacular downfall had to be symbolic. Grandma Eleanor's house. The very place Chloe had schemed to steal from me, not just in terms of bricks and mortar but in terms of family legacy, love, and belonging. I sent out carefully worded invitations to key family members, aunts, uncles, a few close family friends who had known us all our lives, and of course the guest of honor, Chloe. The pretext was a serious, urgent discussion about the estate, specifically, as I phrased it, the heartbreaking necessity of considering selling the house to cover my mounting legal fees due to the ongoing and very public investigation. I knew that particular bait would be irresistible to Chloe. She'd want to be there, radiating false sympathy, probably already mentally calculating how she could benefit from a quick, distress-driven sale. She arrived looking the picture of poised, concerned elegance, a mask of carefully curated sorrow etched on her face. "Sarah, darling, I am so sorry you are going through all this," she cooed, her hand squeezing my arm with a pressure that felt more like a vice than a comfort. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy was nauseating. I had to physically fight the urge to recoil. Once everyone was settled in the grand, slightly faded drawing room, the same room where Grandma's will had been read, the same room where Chloe's envy had first visibly flickered, I moved to the heavy oak door. I locked it. A small, almost imperceptible click in the large room, but Chloe's head, I noted with grim satisfaction, twitched ever so slightly. I stood before them, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my voice, when I spoke, was surprisingly steady, imbued with a cold clarity I hadn't known I possessed. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know this has been an incredibly difficult and painful time for everyone, especially with the horrific accusations that have been leveled against me." I saw the familiar mix of pity and suspicion in the eyes that met mine. Chloe looked suitably, tragically mournful. "Before we discuss the painful prospect of selling this beloved house," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the assembled faces and landing, with deliberate weight, on Chloe, "I think it is high time we talked about what really happened to Grandma Eleanor's necklace." A nervous murmur rippled through the room. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. As you all know, I was accused of stealing it. I was framed, to be precise. My eyes bored into Chloe's. Her practiced smile faltered, just for a nanosecond, the composure slipping like a loose stone. Then I began. Calmly, methodically, I laid out the entire sordid story. The initial subtle manipulations, the insidiously planted pawn ticket, the false accusations that had nearly destroyed me. Then I transitioned to my own painstaking investigation. I connected my laptop to the large, wall-mounted television screen. "I believe many of you are familiar with the concept of online forums," I said, my voice even. The first image that flashed up was a high-resolution screenshot of Bluebird_77's profile page from the exclusive collectors forum. Then the damning messages. My Aurelia persona conversing intimately with Bluebird_77. The cleverly disguised, yet ultimately identifiable photos of the Star of Eleanor. Gasps, sharp and sudden, rippled through the room. "This individual," I stated, my voice ringing with conviction, was actively attempting to sell Grandma's priceless necklace on the black market for a very large sum of untraceable money. Chloe sat bolt upright, her face draining of color, leaving her makeup standing out in stark clownish relief. This is utterly absurd," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "What on earth does any of this have to do with anything?" "Oh, it has everything to do with it, Chloe," I said, my voice hardening, the ice finally entering my tone. I then displayed the compiled IP address traces Liam had so brilliantly uncovered, linking Bluebird_77's online activity directly to the internet cafe near Chloe's apartment, at times correlating precisely with her known movements and the timing of our messages. Next I played the audio. The digitally voice-modulated call between Mr. Hoffman and Chloe. Her voice, unmistakably hers despite the electronic distortion, discussing the necklace, her thinly veiled arrogant admissions of how she had acquired it. Chloe's eyes darted around the room like a trapped, desperate animal. That could be anyone. She cried out, her voice cracking, a note of hysteria creeping in. "That proves nothing." "Really?" I raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Then perhaps you can explain this, Chloe." I clicked the mouse, and the screen filled with crystal-clear, undeniable hidden camera footage. Frank, my investigator, posing as the meticulous courier, in the opulent private viewing room of the jewelry store. And Chloe, her face alight with avarice, proudly, possessively displaying the Star of Eleanor, its sapphires blazing under the showroom lights, as she discussed its unique provenance, and her confident expectation of a swift seven-figure wire transfer. The room erupted. Aunt Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Uncle David, Chloe's own father, looked as though he'd been physically struck, his face ashen. Chloe leaped to her feet, her carefully constructed composure shattering completely. "This is fake. It's all fake. It's a lie. She's trying to frame me," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusing finger at me, her face contorted with rage and terror. "Is it, Chloe?" I asked softly, the quiet question cutting through her histrionics. "Is it really fake?" As if on cue, a firm, authoritative knock sounded on the drawing room door. I turned and unlocked it. 2 uniformed police officers and, behind them, Detective Miller stepped inside. I had briefed them thoroughly an hour earlier, providing them with a comprehensive dossier of all my painstakingly gathered evidence. Detective Miller's gaze, cold and unwavering, found Chloe. "Chloe Anderson," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, merely stating a fact. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and filing a false police report." Chloe stared, her mouth agape, her eyes bulging. Then she crumpled. Not in a graceful faint, but in a messy, sobbing, incoherent heap on Grandma's antique Persian rug as the officers moved efficiently to cuff her. "No, you can't. She's the liar. He set me up. She did this to me," she wailed, thrashing impotently as they helped her to her feet and began to lead her out, past the stunned, horrified, and now utterly disgusted faces of our family. Her desperate cries echoed through the suddenly silent house. The drawing room was deathly quiet for a long, pregnant moment, the only sound Chloe's receding, hysterical protests fading into the distance. Then Aunt Carol started to cry, deep, shuddering sobs. My revenge was complete. Not in a moment of violence, but in the devastating, undeniable public evisceration of her character, her greed, and her breathtaking cruelty. The Star of Eleanor would be recovered. My name, my honor would be cleared. Chloe would face the cold, hard justice she so richly deserved. Her brutal betrayal had met an equally brutal and exquisitely public end. The aftermath was as messy and painful as one might expect. Chloe, faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, the damning digital trail, Frank's meticulous testimony, the undeniable video footage, and eventually, the recovered Star of Eleanor from a safety deposit box she'd foolishly rented under a thinly veiled false name, saw her legal defense crumble like dry leaves. She was charged with a litany of crimes, including grand larceny, perjury for her calculated false statements to the police, and even breaking and entering, as evidence strongly suggested she'd made a duplicate of my spare key months before the theft, biding her time. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to a significant prison term. Justice, though slow and arduous, had finally, decisively been served. The Star of Eleanor was returned to me, its magnificent sapphire seeming to glow with a renewed, vibrant brilliance, as if sighing in relief to be free of Chloe's tainted, greedy touch. My name was officially, publicly cleared. The heavy, suffocating cloud of suspicion that had shadowed me for months finally, blessedly lifted. Family dynamics, however, were irrevocably altered. Chloe's parents, my aunt and uncle, were understandably devastated, consumed by shame and a grief of a different kind. Our relationship became strained, a landscape of polite but distant formalities. Other family members, those who had allowed themselves to doubt me, offered awkward, halting apologies. But those few who had quietly stood by me, like Aunt Carol, who eventually saw through Chloe's intricate web of manipulations, grew even closer. True bonds had been tested by fire and proven strong. I decided, after much soul-searching, to sell Grandma Eleanor's beautiful old house. As much as I loved it, as many cherished memories as it held, it had become too intertwined with the darkness of Chloe's betrayal. I used the proceeds, along with the rest of my rightful inheritance, to buy a small sun-drenched cottage by the sea, a place of salt air, crashing waves, and profound, healing peace. The Star of Eleanor I kept. It now sits in a secure vault, but when I do take it out, it serves not just as a reminder of my beloved grandmother's enduring love, but as a testament to my own resilience, a shining symbol of the fierce, desperate fight I had won. Looking back, the entire ordeal taught me some harsh, indelible lessons. Betrayal, I learned, can indeed come from the most unexpected and closest of quarters. Greed, unchecked, can twist a human soul into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. But it also taught me about my own strength, a depth of resolve and cunning I never knew I possessed. I learned that truth, even when buried under mountains of deceit and treachery, has a powerful, undeniable way of fighting its way to the surface, especially when it is armed with unwavering determination and a refusal to be silenced. My life now is quieter, more deliberate, perhaps a little more cautious than before, but it is undeniably wholly mine again. I have found peace. I have reclaimed my control. And I carry with me the quiet, steely satisfaction of knowing that Chloe's brutal attempt to destroy me, to steal my legacy and my future, ultimately led to her own very public, very brutal, and exquisitely just downfall. Karma, as they say, can indeed be quite the storyteller.